known some of you for 30 years plus.
I
was in high school then.
It's good.
I'm excited to be here. I am Dr. Mark Baker. I'm a clinical psychologist, so all the stories I tell are about therapy, just because that's what I do. And the topic today is talking about feelings. That's what psychologists do, feelings in 2024. It is 2024. I was just getting used to saying 23 on my chest. So why don't we start with a prayer? Let's do that. Lord, thank you that you've given us this place and this time to come together. I pray, Lord, for our fellowship, that you would be in the center of that. I pray for the words that I speak this morning, that you would guide them. Those things that are helpful, I pray, would stick. Those things that aren't, I pray people would forget. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Forgetting isn't a problem. Yeah, there we go. Well, it is January, and every January, my phone rings off the hook because people survive the holidays. You get through the holidays and you call your psychologist. That's the first thing you do. We're going to talk about feelings, especially, the aftermath of the holidays and how to deal with the feelings because of that. And I'm going to talk about in the next couple of weeks, the two biggest reasons people have problems over the holidays. And the second biggest reason people have problems and they come in to see me is because they didn't have a family to share the holiday with. So have to deal with loneliness. The number one, the biggest reason people come to see me is because they had a family that they were with during the holidays. And that's the number one reason people call me in January. It's because how do I deal with my family? Childhood stuff comes up, and you've just had that experience, I know. So we got to be able to deal with those feelings. So I'm going to talk about that over the next couple of weeks. And then the third week, I'm going to talk about what's the point of having feelings anyway. So we'll talk about that. What's the point? What's the purpose of having feelings? So let's start with dealing with not having someone to be with. Loneliness is different from the capacity to be alone. The capacity to be alone is a sign of good mental health. If you can be alone, be with by yourself, to be able to meditate, pray, and be with God by yourself, is a good sign of mental health. If you can't do that, that's actually a problem. So I want to make a distinction that we'll talk about this morning, the difference between loneliness and being alone. And I think it's particularly a problem in our society today. Nicholas Carr wrote an article in the Atlantic Monthly, it was 2 or 3 years ago. Is Google making us stupid? Do you remember this article, some of you? Yeah, it brought up a whole controversy now that people are talking about. Is the internet dumbing us down? And so there's a lot of research that's going on now, and psychologists are trying to figure this out. Is the internet a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there's no one answer to that. We have kids who come into my office who are addicted to social media, and we notice that the kids who use social media the most are having the most psychological problems. What's going on there? So we're trying to figure that out. The internet is a thing. It's not good or bad. It can be used for either. But the argument is this, is that we're losing our ability to maintain our attention. Our attention span is shrinking. And certainly for me, now some of that's age related, I'll admit that. But some of the psychologists are thinking, well, some of that is because we're getting used to this hyper-stimulation and task switching. If you just walk down, well, not San Vicente Boulevard, that doesn't count. Walk down any other street, because everybody jogs down this street. So notice that as I'm coming in with joggers. But any other street, and you'll see people on their phones and they're just doing this, they're just swiping. Right? They're multitasking. And I'm here to tell you, no one's good at multitasking. Not really. You think you are. But really, you have to be able to focus in order to do something really, really well. So we're living in a society today where it is shrinking our attention span. We have kids who can't read a whole book because it's not interactive. I don't get. There's nothing to push or touch or nothing that's interacting with me. So we're wondering, is this doing something to our brains? Carr went on to write a book called The Shallows, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and the subtitle is, "What is the internet doing to our brains?" kind of interesting. The capacity to be alone means you have to be calm. You have to be able to focus. You have to be able to just be with your own thoughts and listen to God. And that is a capacity that I think is under attack in our society today, not just for our kids, for me too. I mean, I go out to dinner with my kids and, the first thing we all do is look at our phones. Of course, that's how you order. So start, And then to get them to put their phones down is tough. But I think it's a challenge for us because the ability to be alone gives us that ability to be a centered, present person. Now, aloneness is the time to contemplate ourselves and others and God. It's the punctuation point between our relationships. I believe we're fundamentally relational creatures. We're created that way, but we need punctuation points in the sentence of life. Times when we are not with others, times when we are able to be quiet and think. So I believe we must be able to be alone well in order to be with others well. You need both, and that is part of how we love, be able to think about those that are meaningful to us. So what is loneliness? Loneliness is being discouraged by the awareness of being alone. Loneliness is a negative thing. Loneliness is when I don't feel good about my being alone. And the core problem of loneliness is the meaning you make out of when you're alone. What does it mean about you when you're alone? That creates the problem with loneliness. Let me give you an example. I'll call her Rebecca. All my names are fake. Beautiful woman, she dresses neatly, always very attractive in my waiting room. I think it makes me look good to have people like that in my waiting room. They think he must be good, just look like it. So we all put together why her friends wonder why she comes to therapy. She enters my office in a composed and well-dressed, sharp look. Most sessions we sit there in silence. And then if I wait long enough and I don't say anything, then the sadness overtakes her. And by the end of most sessions, she's weeping. Rebecca holds a secret which has become a prison of loneliness for her. She tells me things because she trusts no one. She suffers beyond words inside and nobody knows. She lets no secrets out, so she lets no affirmation in. So if you don't tell anybody really the truth about how you feel about yourself, then you never really feel validated because they're just validating what you tell them. But if you don't give them the deepest part of you, then you can't really feel affirmed on the deepest parts. Her secret is that she believes she cannot be loved because her parents never held her. They never told her, I love you. They were just criticizing her and telling her how to do it better. That's how she was raised. She's my age, so she was raised, to be seen and not heard, that kind of thing. And your performance is what mattered, not your feelings. So she resorted to what many kids did in that era is perfectionism. She wanted to just be a perfect girl, a perfect little girl in order to get in order to avoid the criticism, really. It wasn't so much about getting compliments as it was about avoiding criticisms. So she looks perfect on the outside, but secretly despairs on the inside. She believes a lie. She thinks you can earn love. You can't. You can earn acceptance, you can earn money, you can earn popularity, you can earn achievement, you can't earn love. Because love is something you have because you're worthy of it. Yeah. Love is something that's given unconditionally. But she doesn't know that. So, and many kids do this. These are the ones that slip through the cracks in the school system because they get A's and they always look good and they turn their homework in on time and nobody knows that really secretly inside they don't feel loved. What they do feel is appreciated for their efforts. So you end up feeling useful but not valuable. And so that's how Rebecca feels. So being alone is not peaceful for her. At least it wasn't when she first came to see me. It was a confirmation of her worthlessness. The reason I'm alone is because no one really wants to be with me. So the meaning of being alone turned into loneliness for her. It was the meaning of being alone. Rebecca believes in God, and she believes that he helps people in need, but she just doesn't believe that it applies to her. And of course, God is good, God is gracious, but I don't deserve it. I haven't earned it. I haven't earned God's love. That's a cycle you don't want to get on. So her loneliness confirms for her that even God has abandoned her. And in psychology, we call it the dark night of the soul. Now, that's not actually what that term means, but we're stealing it. Often psychologists steal biblical references. I don't know what they're talking about. We're not known for our religiosity. But when psychologists call it dark night of the soul, they mean that I believe that there are good things out there in life. I believe that good things can happen to other people, but I just don't believe it's going to happen for me. And so you're tortured because look around, everybody else seems happy. Everybody else seems to have someone to love and someone loves them, but I don't feel that way. And it's a cycle that spins around and around and around. So even when she's surrounded by Christian people, she still feels alone. So the holidays for Rebecca are really painful because she is very lonely, and that her loneliness, as I said, confirms that she hasn't earned love. That's a trick about love. That's why one of the reasons I think Christianity has to be right, because the only thing that can heal us is grace. It's free. You can't earn it. You can't earn it, right? That's the only thing that works. Okay? I spent decades trying to deal with people who think that somehow they can earn worthiness. You can't. It's an experience that you have. It's not something you achieve. And many Christians are on this bicycle too that goes north. So I have gotten Rebecca to finally realize that you don't have to tell all your secrets to everyone. I don't think that's good. I think that's actually stupid. But you have to be able to tell most of your secrets to someone. Someone needs to hear most of your secrets, because unless that gets out and you're seen for who you really are, you're not going to feel that grace. You're not going to feel that acceptance. Psychology, we call it acceptance. When you share who you really are, and at the end of the session, Rebecca will do this with me, and after she wipes her eyes and she's ready to, sometimes she has to sit in the waiting room and cry out a little bit longer. And at the end of the session, I say, well, I'll see you next Tuesday. And that's it. She said, really? You want me to come back and just cry? Yeah, that works for me. See you then. And she gradually is getting that sense of acceptance, and we're gradually helping her develop the capacity to, yes, be alone at times, but not be so discouraged by your being alone. It doesn't necessarily mean that no one wants to be with you. I had to work on that too. When the ending of my sessions, it took years for her to realize, no, we're ending the session not because I don't want to be with you anymore, it's because I can't. I'm out of time. Those are different, and it took a while for her to get that. But she is, and she's been developing, I think, a greater capacity to be alone. So there are 3 problems with loneliness. At the time of myself. That was just my introduction. Now but give my credentials. That takes another 10 minutes. Okay, the 3 problems with loneliness. I think the first is individualism. Now, in our country today, we prize that. Individuality in America is something we pride ourselves in. We have all this space that we had in this country, and we conquered the wilderness with our individualism. A carpool is 2 people. 2. And so when you're driving on the freeway, all those cars that are not in the carpool lane have 1 person in them. So we're built for that. We're built for individuality. Work is an acceptable means for not having relationships. For years when I was younger, I couldn't come home for Christmas to see my parents. I would say, well, I'm working. They go, oh, okay. As long as you're doing something that's conquering out there on your own, then it's okay. We have in this country what psychoanalyst Robert Stollerow calls the myth of the isolated mind. We have this myth that we're all individual people and that we're all separate from each other. And it's based on Rene Descartes' philosophy. I think, therefore I am, right? There's a split between mind and body. You've heard this name, Rene Descartes. He was wrong, but he has been the basis of philosophical thought for how many years? 400? Somebody knows, a while. Until Martin Heidegger came along and kicked him out of first place. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is that we all, and almost everybody who comes into my office, has this belief that I'm an individual, that I'm separate. I have a separate mind from you. I march to the sound of a different drummer. That's good in America. I go my own way. I don't care. I've heard people say, I don't regret anything that's ever happened to me because it's made me the man that I am today. Really? You regret nothing that's ever happened to you? I can think of a couple of things I regret. So see, the truth is, individualism is a relational construct. So if I need to be separate from the group, what I have to do is find out what the group's doing, and then I got to be separate from the group. Wait a minute. So I need the group to know that I'm separate from the group. You know what I'm saying? We're relational beings. We're fundamentally relational beings. Individualism is a myth. It's a myth. But we tell ourselves that because it helps us tolerate the unbearable embeddedness of being, as Stoller calls it. That my being is embedded in you. I need you in order for me to be me. As I'm talking here and you're giving me facial expressions, we're having a conversation. I'm bouncing. I know if I want to keep talking or there's people looking, I'll keep talking. They're not looking. I won't. We did a psychology experiment where the professor didn't know it was an experiment and all the students knew. He was teaching a course, graduate course, and every time he said a certain phrase that they all knew they wanted him to say, they looked up and looked at him. And then when he left that phrase, they looked down, right? So they're going to shape his behavior. He didn't know this. And so by the end of the class, he was preaching from the hallway. He wanted their attention, It's like, we don't realize it, but we are interactive and relational creatures. We're built that way. I need you to react to me, and you need me to react to you in order for us to be who we are. That's a hard thing. That's why Stoller calls it the unbearable embeddedness of being. Because it's unbearable for me to really admit I need you to be me, because you're not reliable. So that's a scary thought. So what I'm going to do is I'm just telling you, I don't need you. No, I'll just be me. It's a defense. It's a defense against how we really are made, how we really are psychologically. We are fundamentally relational creatures. And individuality is actually a myth that we've created to make ourselves feel safer from the fact that I need you to be me. It's how we're made. Take it up with God if you don't like it. Feel free to argue with me, but that's how it is. Individualism leads to loneliness in relationships. If my individualism is what's most important about me, it leads to loneliness in a relationship because I don't really want to rely on you because I'm afraid to. And so then if I then put on this cloak of individualism, then I end up, when I'm alone, feeling very lonely because I'm not really connected to people. I'm giving you the false self, not the real self. And you can be living with other people and feel very lonely if you believe in individualism as a really important character quality for human beings. And it's happening in our society. You know this. Women are not getting married or having children to pursue professional goals as they were in previous generations. People who never marry has doubled since 1960. The average age of men getting married now is 30. The average age of women is 28.5. I bet you there are people in this room who got married before that. Things have changed where we want to pursue our careers, we want to pursue our individual interests. Men still struggle with having few or no friends. They compete with each other rather than connect with each other. It's less true here. If the men are in this room, and look at the number of men in this room, it's a lot, right? And yes, we should take a bow. I mean, these are the good guys right here. Because most churches, it's mainly women. But men are showing up to realize I need other men, I need other people. In order for me to be a full version of who I am, I need to be with other people. So Rene Descartes was wrong. His idea was, I think, therefore I am, so I'm an individual. My individual capacity to think is what makes me the best version of who I am. And that has dominated philosophy and dominated actually the church too, for the last few centuries. See the inattention thing right there. We can't live without it. It used to be that if people, when you were talking.
She was a plant.
She was a plant, that's right. An object lesson right there.
No, you coming out.
It cost me $50. It used to be, if someone took a call when you were talking to them, that was rude. Now it's commonplace. You're talking to someone, oh, I gotta get this, I got my phone right here. This is how we live. It's not a good or bad thing, it's a thing, but it's just shortening our attention span. So now we think differently. I'm not going to go into it very deeply, but Martin Heidegger in the last century turned philosophy upside down. His biggest book was Being in Time. How many people know Martin Heidegger? You do? Okay. Anybody want to explain him? Have you tried to read who's tried to read Being in Time? I got a couple pages into it. I had to have somebody else explain it to me. Fortunately, my mentor went back and got a PhD in philosophy, and Martin Heidegger was his area of subject, so he's been able to translate it to me. But the point is this, that you just thinking doesn't really establish being. Heidegger's idea is no, it's something much more experiential, or more phenomenological than that. That thinking isn't good enough to get you there. You can't reason your way to God, we would say. Heidegger doesn't say it that way, but we would say that. It's an experience. Now that's starting to sound more Christian again, right? What is it that changes us? What is it that makes us most real? It's a phenomenological experience. We would say experience of grace, experience of God. And if you're all created in the image of God, then that's what I'm looking for from you. Martin Buber said, when we get together, it's either an I, thou, or an I, it experience. But what's most real is when it's I, thou, when two people genuinely show up and where we tell our secrets to each other, we're willing to be vulnerable with each other, God shows up in those moments. Mm-hmm. Those are the most real moments. And that's what we are created for. The experience of God. Experience of God. So individuality flies in the face of that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things great about this country. I don't want to live anywhere else. I don't care who gets elected. I'm not leaving. I'm staying. But there's some things that we need to face in ourselves, and one is this belief in individuality, that's what makes us most real. And I would say there are important things about recognizing our differences and appreciating our differences, and I agree with that. But the thing that makes us most real is our ability to connect with God and connect with each other. So then when I'm alone, it's not because I have to be, or the people don't want to be around me, or that there's something defective about me. That's not why I'm alone, because I haven't told my secret to anyone. No, that I'm alone now because it's, like I said before, the punctuation points between my connectedness with you. It's a break. It's a time to rest, so that I can reconnect. So pursuing your career, being your own person, marching to the sound of a different drummer are not the ultimate values in life. We're finding that actually we are built for attachment, for secure attachment. That's what's the way psychology is going now. Really, that sounds Christian, doesn't it? And I've got really good news for you today, that men and women really prefer secure attachment. There have been several studies over the years, but one that just came out recently in the Journal of Sex Research, that religious people enjoy sex more. You're welcome. Now, what I didn't say is religious people have more sex. Because you already know that's not true. But the sex I do have, they enjoy more. Well, why is that? Because you're built for attachment. You're built for secure attachment. You want to know that the person you had sex with is going to be there the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And we value monogamy. It's a value of ours. I want the hookup culture is backwards. I don't know if you have kids in college. I do. And the hookup culture is you have sex, and then you decide if you're going to date. Now, when I was in college, if you had sex, you were dating. That was it, you know. There's no, let's talk about it, you know. At least what I heard, I don't know if it's true. But what we're built for is secure attachment. What I want to know is that I have a secure relationship with you, and then sex is a byproduct of that, not the other way around. It doesn't work. The hookup culture doesn't work. Now we have, I heard one psychologist say, we have an epidemic of women on college campuses reporting sexual violations. And it's huge. It's like 1 in 4, more than that even. And I was concerned about that because I'm sending my daughter to college, you know. So I was asking people, did 1 out of 4 of your friends, have they been raped on a college campus? And none of the girls said yes to that. None of them did. So the psychologist saying, well, what's going on? Well, it's because the hookup culture is that you should have sex just because it's your individual right. You know, we have the pill, we have the morning after pill, you know, there's no consequences, right? So they're having sex, and then the next day, the guy's not interested in her anymore. And so she's, well, that's not right. It's not right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. That actually, we've lied to women to make them think that they need to have sex that doesn't have attachment because that's what men want. But that's not what women want. And that's not what anybody wants. Yeah. They want to feel secure attachment, and then sex should be an outgrowth of that secure attachment. Sorry, I got into that longer than I thought. We're all adults, so it's okay. It's being recorded. Don't play that for your children. Maybe you should.
Yes.
All right, so individualism is a problem that creates loneliness and detachment and disconnection. The second problem is the fear of being alone. We become what we fear, you know that. And the fear of being alone makes loneliness happen because I'm afraid of it and what it means for me to be alone. Edgar Allan Poe, you know this. You haven't read it in a long time. With a man throwing himself into his work to avoid the loneliness of lost love. Here's a knock at the door. He thinks it's Lenore, but it's a raven. And he thinks the raven will tell him something about her. He's obsessed with ending his loneliness. And by being obsessed with ending your loneliness, you perpetuate your loneliness because you don't have a capacity to sit with it, learn from it, be there. See if I can read this. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone was gently rapping on my chamber door. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bonds above, by thy God we both adore. Tell this soul with sorrow laden, when the distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven. Be that word our sign of parting, bird of fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take the form from off my door, quoth the raven. Nevermore. This loneliness, right? I hate being alone. I hate this feeling. And he was thinking what men often do, you know, I did everything right. Why isn't she here? You've heard me say this. One of the things I struggle with dealing with divorced men is that, you know, they go over and over and over again, all the things I did. I bought her the house. I worked less hours. I, you know, put her in the pool in the backyard, and I did everything right. The problem with that is that if she didn't leave you for what you did, then she left you for who you are. And that's much worse. It's much worse. And so they go round and round and round and trying to explain why it is that she could have possibly left. Couldn't be because of me, maybe something I did or didn't do. That's, we call that, guilt as a defense against shame. I'd rather feel guilty than ashamed. I come up with reasons to feel guilty. Now, the raven does give him news about Lenore and when he will see her, nevermore. And that's what he thought, and that's why he was tortured. No, I'm not going to get her back. She's not going to come back. And the secret is, it's because of me, not because of her. That's why loneliness is so torturous. Because if you didn't think it was because of you, you could be alone and you could think about it. But if you think it was, then being alone becomes torturous. He was obsessed with Lenore, or curing the pain of not having her, and that was his loneliness. So the fear of loneliness makes it much worse, because it has some meaning about you. What does it mean about you? He mistook the pain of grief for unending loneliness. Now, grief and depression are two different things. Grief and loneliness are two different things. Now, grief is one of the few things that feels bad but is good. It's very important for you to grieve. If you don't grieve, you're stretching it out. You're kicking the can down the road. So grieving is very important. It's, there's stages of grief. You know that. Denial, bargaining. Depression, acceptance. But it's a process, and it's not linear. It goes up and down and back and forth. And it's very important for you to grieve. And it feels sad, but that's different than loneliness. That's not the same. You can grieve lost love. It's important to grieve lost love. But that's not loneliness. I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. But the third thing, the problem is attempts to fix your loneliness. When you look to other people to fix your loneliness, you make it worse. It's not other people's job to fix your loneliness. You know these people, the only ones you see in the church parking lot, and you see them coming towards you, go, oh no. Did you see me? Did you see me? The ones that give you a hug and they won't let go. The ones that are hardest to love are the ones that need us the most. You know that. But they're looking for someone to fix their loneliness. I feel empty and lonely, and oh, Dr. Baker, give me a hug. To try and get me to fix their loneliness. No, it doesn't work. It makes it worse. You know this, you can be lonely in a crowd. Some people come to church expecting others to fix their loneliness, and they are disappointed when they don't. Those people are kind of cold. And the most tragic example of that is people who are lonely in a marriage. Of course, I've seen that over the years. I saw a couple of marriage counseling close to 20 years ago. And I just met with one of the members of the couple this week. He fired me from trying to help them 20 years ago. And she told me that they have been in marriage counseling every single week for 20 years. They've seen all the big name psychologists in Los Angeles. You can only stay with one person so long, and you fire them and get somebody else. He's a very successful businessman, educated. They've got great kids. She's also very educated. He's brilliant at his job, decent father, but no friends. She came from a very dysfunctional family, and her role in the family was to be the fixer. That was her job. Her brother was pretty pathological, but her job was to fix up shit. She was always good, got great grades, and her job was to fix all the problems. She was a peacemaker in the family. The problem in their marriage was they had a tragic agreement, a tragic unconscious agreement. She was responsible to fix the marriage, but they both agreed. She felt that was true because that's the way she was raised, and he was happy to give her that job. We have problems. Well, look what I've got to deal with. And she told me this. The marriage therapist recently said to her, the new one, he will last. He said to him in the session, oh, you need to be less critical. And he said immediately, yeah, I think we both need to work on that. He turns to his wife and immediately just kind of, hand it off to her. She's supposed to fix it. So, what she did? She went home and asked their kids, who are all adults now, do you think I'm too critical? Because, I'm wondering, so She takes it on immediately. She's like, well, I guess I got to go check that out. Maybe I am too critical. And she's been doing that for 20 years. I said, no, you're both tragically lonely in this relationship, and you can't fix his loneliness, and he certainly can't fix yours. That's not how that works. Now, you guys need to work on something. You got to do something different, but making someone else responsible for your loneliness won't work. It won't work. In marriage, and I've said this before in this room, how relationships work is they start with commitment. You commit yourself to someone. A real relationship starts with commitment. And if you're committed to someone, enough time goes by, you develop trust. So commitment leads to trust. And if you really trust someone, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to disappoint you. Of course they are. That's what comes next. So trust, commitment leads to trust. Trust leads to disappointment, and disappointment leads to conflict. So there you go. There's every marriage in the world right there. And you didn't have to pay for that. So yeah, what you paid for. So here's the key. So commitment leads to trust. Trust leads to disappointment. Disappointment leads to conflict. And then there's the action point. There's the point. You're going to make a decision right at that point. What are you going to do? You know what most people do? They recommit themselves. They start the cycle all over again. Buy the flowers, you apologize, say I'm sorry, and you recommit. And recommit is not bad. I'm glad you're all here because you recommitted yourself after those terrible fights you've all had. But that doesn't change anything. If nothing changes, what do you think is going to happen? Commitment, trust, disappointment, conflict, commitment, trust. There's your life, right? So what changes? The opportunity to change is after that conflict. Instead of just recommitting yourself, you learn something new about yourself. That's the only way it can change. So that the next time you fight, the fight's different because you are different. Not that you learn something new about your partner. That's cheating. No. All right, now what you need to do differently next time is, well, I'm going to tell you how to say it. Next time, say it this way. You're trying to get them to change, right? That doesn't work. That's cheating. No. Ask yourself, what did I learn going through this process? What did I learn that's going to make me a better lover of others? What did I learn about myself that's going to help me get ready for that disappointment? How to respond to disappointment. This is one of my, I know I'm on the internet too. I do these shorts, little videos, and one of my shorts has got the most views, how to respond to disappointment. Boy, people are looking at that one. They don't like my answer. Because when you get to the point of disappointment, learn something new about yourself. That's how you respond to disappointment. That's the healthy way to respond to disappointment. It's not about the other person, it's about you. What can you learn about you? Yeah, I'm too critical, or no, I'm too distant, or yeah, I'm too judgmental, or whatever it is. Learn something new about yourself so that you're now ready for the next time. And it's coming when your commitment leads to trust, leads to disappointment. You can't fix someone else, you can only work on fixing yourself. So trying to get someone else to fix your loneliness or fix your pain or fix your problems is only going to lead to more problems in your life. So figure out how to take responsibility for yourself and what you need to learn about you. Let me give you one other literary example. Jean-Paul Sartre. Hitting all the big names today. I'm not going to read it to you. It's no exit. It's a play about three people who die and they go to this Victorian style waiting room. Joseph is a newspaper man, very principled pacifist, died for his beliefs, but he mistreated his wife. It comes out as we learn. Estelle, beautiful, social status, rich, died of pneumonia. We feel sorry for her at first. Then we find out that she murdered her illegitimate daughter. Not so good. Inez, unmarried, hardworking postal clerk, salt of the earth. Turns out she's critical and self-centered by the end of the play. So what started off with three sympathetic people that we thought we were going to be sorry for them, There ended up to be three very selfish, lonely people thrown together in this waiting room, this Victorian style waiting room. And they discovered that there are no breaks in their being together. There's no sleep, there's no eating, there's no one going to the bathroom, they don't even blink. They're together with two other selfish people forever. They realized there was no exit from this waiting room, they thought. Disgusted with their inhumanity to each other, Joseph screams, "So this is hell." I'd never believed it. Remember all we were told about those chambers and the fire and the brimstone, the burning marl, old wives' tales. There's no need for red hot pokers. Here it is. Hell is other people. Existentialism. Hell is other people. Now, Sartre was not a believer, and pretty sure he wouldn't be here in this room today. He was close, but he missed something. Yes, the cure for a lonely life is not just being with other people. No, it won't work. Selfishness can create loneliness and hell instead of fellowship. That's true. So that's his picture of hell. C.S. Lewis has a different picture. Hell is a group of hungry people in a room together. Their arms are locked and everybody's starving. So you can't get the food. All the food you could possibly eat is right there. They can't get it because their arms are locked forever. Heaven is a room full of all the food you could eat, and other people are standing around, and their arms are locked, and they're feeding each other. So you decide. Selfishness is hell, right? Selfishness is hell. And heaven is taking all the same human needs that we have and giving to other people. So what's the cure for loneliness? Give to other people. That's what we do in psychology. And also it's one of our cures for depression, is that we give people assignments to go and do acts of grace, acts of love for other people. Your assignment this week is to do something loving for somebody else, and you'd be surprised how all of a sudden, people kind of lift out of their loneliness, lift out of their discouragement when they practice loving acts towards other people. That may be heaven. I think C.S. Lewis is a pretty smart guy, and I think he was onto something there. That's our cure from what otherwise might be hell, is to care for other people, not just try to get our own needs met. So the solution to loneliness is learning to be alone and learning to care for others at the same time. And looking at hard, what is the meaning? When you're alone, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? You have to be, you're supposed to be, you deserve to be? Or is it a break in the times with your relationships with other people? I already talked about the attention span thing. Develop the capacity to be alone. Let me talk about Celia. She was raised in a quiet Midwestern town, very uncomplicated life, married her childhood sweetheart, had a son, very happy, uneventful life until her son developed a blood disease requiring repeated hospitalizations. And one stay in the hospital, her husband was injured at work and suffered brain damage. So both her son and her husband were in the two different hospitals at the same time. And she had to run back and forth between the hospitals because her husband was seriously injured and her son we didn't know her son was going to make it. And this went on for a couple of weeks when she would go back and forth between the two until her husband then did pass away, but the boy survived. And sadly, she was at the other hospital when her husband passed away. Now she's a devoted mother and she carries on. So now 10 years later, she shows up in my office, 10 years after that event. Finally came to therapy one January after the holidays. She survived another holiday season, but she didn't want to keep just surviving. She was surviving the holidays, right? She was too afraid to get close to anyone else, never dated anyone else. She poured her life into her son, who now was doing fine. And she wanted to deal with this loneliness, a painful loneliness she felt every year. And it was understandable, it's just a victim of circumstances that this would happen. But she decided, well, I guess I need to talk about this, which was, I'm glad she did. Nothing had changed in the 10 years. She had the same friends, which were mainly her in-laws. Those were the same friends that she was hanging. As a way of kind of keeping them alive, I think, but just hanging out with them. Same lifestyle, same home, the bills still came in his name. 10 years later, the bills were still coming in his name. She'd write the checks. Nothing changed. Until now, when we started talking about that. So really, the bills are in John's name. Really? That's interesting. Do you think that's interesting? So really, is that interesting? So we would get to talk about it, and talk about her sadness, and talk about the grief that she had. She had really complicated grief, and she had unprocessed grief. So it went on for 10 years. She'd been grieving for 10 years and didn't know it. And she started talking about that. And out of that came her courage to love. It was safe loving her son, safe loving the in-laws of the man that she loved and lost. And it was unsafe to let other people in, to love new people. So she left her old circle of friends. She left the safety of the familiar. She put the bills in her name. She started going to a different church where there were eligible bachelors her age. She's finding new hobbies, closer friends, started to date again, and just told me, this was actually a few years ago, that she plans to marry again and she wanted me to officiate. And what changed her life, what brought her out of her loneliness, was the courage to love. And I think it takes courage. In a situation like this, it takes courage. And she decided that for herself. I can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. I need to do something different. And it takes courage to do it. I think that to me is real growth. We call it mirroring needs, but it's when I look in her eyes and she says, I think I can do that. I can do it. And I go, I think you can too, because there was this expansiveness, this growth, this woman that wanted more out of life and she realized that she trapped herself in loneliness, which we worked on that for a while, but she thought somehow strangely she deserved. That happens often to people who are victims of crime. They end up somehow feeling they somehow deserved it. It's upside down. They feel guilty, strangely guilty. I've worked with women who are attacked and they feel strangely guilty for that. It's an attempt to make sense out of a senseless world. Sometimes senseless things happen and we can't get our mind around it. So we end up feeling guilty as if we had got some control and that would make it make sense. No, it's just random sometimes. Sometimes accidents just happen. So courage to love, that's how we heal the loneliness. And the third thing with the cure for loneliness is actually, I think loneliness is created by God to point us to God. It's not a sin to be lonely. It reflects our need for connection, and I think ultimately it directs us to connection to God. Something's missing. If you don't have a relationship with God, something is missing, and you know something's missing. And you're driven to answer that unknown. What is the thing that's missing? I know something's missing. Dag Hammarskjöld, former head of the United Nations, said, pray that your loneliness may spur you to finding something to live for, great enough to die for. Jesus in the garden. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. So then he went on a little further without them, fell to the ground, and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Let not me, what my will, but yours be done. Probably one of the greatest moments in all of loneliness in all of history, right? Where he felt alone. And he felt his fear. Take this cup from me. But then he had the courage to trust God at the end. Not my will, but yours be done. So there's our calling. It may be, if you're feeling lonely after the holidays, it may be there is some prompt in your heart that you're looking for a richer relationship with God. That might be it. I believe God is ever present, ever there for us if we look. So that might be the answer to yours. I don't know. You would have to decide that for yourself. Is this a call for me to learn how to be alone? Is this a call for me to learn how to have the courage to love? Or is this a call for me to point my attention towards God? And maybe my loneliness is directing me in that direction. And here's, I've said this often in this room too, but I want to emphasize again my understanding of comfort. If you're in pain or lonely or suffering on some level, you're in search of comfort. Now, in English, the word comfort has two parts, C-O-M, come with, fort, as in fortified strength. So what comfort means is you do whatever you're doing with strength. When you're praying for comfort, you're not actually praying that the suffering go away, you're praying for strength. That's, I believe, God's definition of comfort. He gives us strength in our times of difficulty. He doesn't always take you out of the valley of the shadow of death. It'll go with you in it.
Sure.
And so that's your prayer, is a prayer for strength, not for the absence. And I think that's true. Happiness is not the absence of problems, it's the presence of courage and strength. And so there's our solution to suffering, is to pray for the strength and the courage to love and the capacity to be alone. Well, we have, I've got a whole minute here to ask questions here. So, Alice, of course.
So the confession and sharing.
Okay.
So, I live by myself, and I noticed loneliness does come.
Mhm.
And when it comes, it reminds me of how the abandonment that happened with my mother and other situations where I felt abandoned. And so when I feel lonely, what comes to me is that I abandoned myself. And I feel disconnected
Mhm.
from me.
Mhm.
And so the confession is that when that happens, I talk to myself as I walk around the house and do
I
shopping.
declare that healthy.
And we have this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think what I realized today is when you said God is part of that, I think that's where God resides. And when I feel lonely, I feel like God is telling me she feels abandoned, that I'm the one who's abandoned God.
Correct.
And that feels sad to me. And I'm like, oh, I want to be, let's get back together, So there's a converse, but it's all within inside. It has nothing to do with what's going on, whether, like you said, in my marriage, I was lonely. So it's not with what people, but it's what's going on inside.
Yeah. That's a beautiful example of the third thing, that you were called to conversation with God, but the way you did it was talking to yourself and God shows up.
Sure.
That's an I-thou relationship with yourself. And God shows up. Beautiful and completely healthy talking to yourself like that. Anybody else? A comment, a question, a story I can use in my next book? I've got a lot of stories from this group, I'll tell you.
Another band to that. I was very active in this group 25 years ago. And it was my honor every year to introduce Mark Baker, at which time he was single, wild-ass guy running around town on a motorcycle. Matter of fact, he was a leader of the biggest motorcycle gang in Los Angeles. They took to somewhere in the middle of the country, Iowa, every summer to turn in the bikes they destroyed over years worth of wild activity and pick up a brand new shiny bike.
Wow.
Get back on the road, taking care of that one. He had a wild life going all the time.
That's how stories are. After 30 years, after 30 years, they just get more and more and more and more. You left out that I was elected president there in the middle of it. I did have a Harley several years ago, but we like to talk about that, but that's not quite the way the story went. Anybody else want to ask a real question or?
Crisis of attention, or is it a crisis of interest? So if you have somebody, like you have a child that has a love for video games, and you're rather bookish, and you go to that child, and you sit down, you try to take that same level of interest in the video game, but you don't, you can hardly handle it. You leave
Exactly.
after 2 minutes. And then there's someone to have the same experience of going and sitting down with you in the study, maybe pulling up a book next to you, and maybe they last 5 minutes. So is it more of a crisis of attention, or is it more of a crisis of interest?
We're trying to figure that out. Actually, there's a debate going on. You know, what's going on? Some people think actually we're rewiring our brains to need hyperstimulation. You know, we need, because the computers are interactive, right? Books are not. You know, it's just more of a slow process. Us sitting down in your study and talking for an hour, that used to be an enjoyable thing. And for some kids, they can't, because I need more stimulation. My brain's going like this. So we don't know the answer to that yet. We'll adapt. Humans adapt. You know, we'll adapt to it. But we're in transition. Just in the last decade, you know, it's exploded. And so, yeah, getting my 18-year-old to sit down and talk to me, I can do it, but it's not easy because he's got all this interesting virtual stuff going on, and I'm just not that interesting, you know, to him.
But it's vice versa is my point. So he can think that about you.
Yeah.
Sitting down with you in the study, reading a book that he's not gonna do that the same way.
No, he's not gonna hold his interest. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, we're as psychologists, we're concerned that there's something pathological going on here. We don't know. We don't know the answer to that yet. We do know that adolescent girls, there's a huge spike in depression and suicidal ideation that we're experiencing now since the smartphone and social media.
Yeah.
So there's something going on. It's not all good. We're trying to figure that out. Yes.
Could the feeling of loneliness would come like low esteem or feels
Yes.
lonely, but then low esteem?
I think, yes, I think with people who are struggling with self-esteem issues and doubts about their self-worth, they're more predisposed to experience loneliness. Because when they're alone, the meaning they make out of it is that I'm not worthy of love. Nobody loves me, right? And that's why they have to hug you longer in the parking lot, you know, because they're trying to get that from you, and you feel that desperation, and it backfires. Nobody wants to be around that.
Yeah.
So you should hug them. They need that hug. They do need that hug. They do need it. Okay, I think we need to stop. I'll still hang around for a few minutes. Do you have any other questions you want to ask? And I've got some books and tapes over here and some really good buys. So super cheap.
Thank you.